Hi, my name's Dave, you're watching Make for Others, and in this episode, we make yard signs of my friend Jason. I've had some ideas for things to make for my friend Jason for a while now, and found out that he had an upcoming business trip out of town, which made it a perfect time to put the plan into action and surprise him. He loves birds, so I'm working on a birdhouse that looks like his house. And since he has an amazing childhood photo, I want to turn it into a massive sign that will be put on his roof. To round it all out, making a whole bunch of smaller signs and putting them in his yard seems like a great idea. By the way, Jason loves practical jokes, so all of these things will be enjoyable for him. Probably. Since I was taking pictures of his house to reference for the birdhouse and roof sign, you can check out those build videos in the links below. I also wanted some overhead pictures so I could calculate the square footage of his yard and figure out how many signs it would take to fill it up. Because when you have pictures like this and this being used, the more yard signs, the better. And I wanted to have a yard overflowing with Jason's. So I put a basketball on the ground and flew the drone up high enough to get a picture of the whole yard. When I got home, I measured the basketball and was able to use that to figure out what a square foot on the image would be. And from that, how many square feet were available in his yard. The nice thing about a perfect sphere like a basketball is that you can use it to make a base measurement because it isn't affected by perspective or the angle of your camera. Since the roof sign was going to be about 5 feet wide and 9 feet tall, I didn't want to go too big with the yard signs, but not so small that you couldn't see the pictures from a distance. I went with a tabloid size sheet of paper, which is 11 inches by 17 inches. At that size, about 100 signs would get me a sea of Jasons. For variety, a mirror version of both images were created. All the copies of one of the pictures were bound up as tight as possible in between 2 sheets of cardboard, with one copy on top for reference and a loose sketch of the border. Since there's a decent amount of white around the images, and that could stop someone from seeing more of the actual pictures since they'll be surrounded by each other, I wanted to get as minimal a border as possible. But cutting that many one by one would take a long time, so I wanted to see if I could do it a different way. We've got a nice bandsaw at work, so at lunchtime I was able to see if cutting them all at the same time could happen. Anytime I cut some of the packed sheets, I added new tape so that the paper would stay together as tight as possible to reduce blowout or shredding. It ended up working really well, so I repeated the process with the other image. Since the signs were just paper and I didn't know what the weather was going to be like, I took them to a local printer to see how much laminating them all would cost. Turns out, laminating 100 signs was going to be really expensive, but because they liked the idea, they gave me a really good price. Which was great because the backup plan I didn't want to do was cover each sign with transparent shipping tape on both sides. Another great part about all this was since their print and lamination area was completely viewable to the customers in the store and anyone walking by the store, thousands of people got to see this lamination process happen. I don't know about you, but these pictures of Jason just give me joy. And I'm sure all the customers and other people that saw them felt joy too. Sure, they probably had questions, but also joy. While the signs were being laminated, I went to the hardware store to see what signpost options were available. All of them were decently priced, but by the time you multiplied the cost by 100 signs, it was a bit much. So instead of buying the wooden stakes there, I cut up some leftover sheets of plywood on the table saw to match the height and width of the stakes from the store. After cutting out enough, I took them to the miter saw, changed the angle to 45 degrees, did a test cut to see if the stake point was good enough, and then set up a stop block so I could make multiple stakes at once. All this took about an hour and was definitely worth the time compared to the cost of buying that many stakes at the store. The lamination went great, so it was time to cut them out. Unfortunately, it wasn't going to work to cut them out on the bandsaw. Since I was busy building Jason's birdhouse, Henry took to the task of preparing Jason after Jason after Jason. He did a great job, and I promised I would never make him cut out any laminated signs of Jason ever again. Since we weren't going to have a lot of time at Jason's house before he came home from his trip, we stapled the signs to the stakes ahead of time. On the morning of the big day, when we were going to install everything, the weather report did not look good. It was supposed to rain, and I was already a little concerned since the angle of the roof was pretty steep. because of the weather alert, it made me rethink the plans for all the projects. What if, instead of completely covering their yard with signs, we put them by the curb in their neighbors' yards? It would be like a really long welcome home line across 20 or so houses. To do that though, we needed to give all the neighbors a heads up before we put signs on their property. Since it was going to be in the middle of the day, I wrote a note telling them what we were doing and thanking them for making it possible. A bunch of copies were made so it could be taped on front doors if neighbors weren't home. Because of the small window of time we had to work with, while I installed the birdhouse and roof sign, my friend May helped install the yard signs.
I've got a wagon full of Jason signs. Check out these bad boys. And we're just gonna go house to house and ask people if they're okay with having these on their curb, because that is a great reveal when Jason comes home tonight to just see himself on either side of the street. That's good.
The nice thing is, all the neighbors she talked with were completely on board.
What is the secret to getting 100 Jasons posted onto the street?
I think it takes big biceps and the inability to be embarrassed to ask a silly question. One of those I'm really good at, and it's not this one.
So this is Jim. He's gonna help out May since there were some technical difficulties that we didn't anticipate when we stapled everything before we put it into the ground. Jim lives nearby. He knows Jason and the whole clan, and now he's part of this. We'll see what happens. So how'd it go?
It was good. I thought I was strong until I tried to hammer those things in.
But it was also tearing, like the staple. Like
Yeah,
if we had to
we
do it over again, we'd probably staple after the fact.
Yeah, we just had to modify it, and the first staples weren't quite strong enough.
And everybody loved what we were doing. There was
Yeah.
not one complaint.
Yeah.
Nice. Thanks, guys. High fives.
High five.
Right here, Mario.